Hello, guys, and welcome to the third edition of Live with Leverage. Today, I'm only joined by Shashank, who will be going through this product update. Hello, Shashank.
Hi, and hello everyone else who's joined us today for the webinar. Thank you for joining us.
We're going to do the standard thing as usual. We're going to wait around 5 minutes to let some guys get in, guys and girls, I should say, to get in here and be ready for us to start. Don't forget, ask questions throughout in the YouTube chat or Telegram, and I'll get those asked for you. And yeah, so guys, I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Enjoy. Okay, I guess we can go ahead and start now. I just want to warn you guys that today's webinar is a little bit shorter than usual due to Baraf being at Consensus in America. So it's just me and Shashank, but that's not bad, is it? All right, Shashank, would you like to go ahead and start us off?
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Joe. So yeah, let's kickstart and see where we are with our product. Now, first things first, as Joe just mentioned, a lot of us, in fact, Bharat is in Consensus. Jerry's out for another conference. Swap's busy also with conferencing. A lot of us are basically busy this week with conferences. And so, we certainly apologize. We like to bring in a lot of good content, and we'll continue to bring it in every 2 weeks. But this one, we're going to treat more like an update, more like what's going on, where we are with our development, what's happening with the beta program. And then, of course, I'll also share very briefly a topic that is close to our heart around anti-money laundering and how we want to make sure that we have the checks and balances in place without being intrusive in a decentralized exchange. So those are the kind of topics that we'll cover this morning. So as you know, the first, of course, impact of a large part of the team, or a good number of us being busy with conference and other things, is that we obviously will not be starting our beta program this week. Our original intention was to start on the 15th of May, which essentially was this Tuesday. Nice good number, middle of the month. At this point in time, we feel like, given that this is conference week, people are out from Leverj, our users and beta testers themselves are busy with conference, we're going to shift that date out. We aren't shifting the date out too far out, but essentially we'll pick things up after we're back from the conference on May 18th. So the exact dates we haven't determined yet, but it'll be the week after May 18th. That said, thank you to everyone who signed up to be a tester. Willow had been sending out forms out to those who had shown interest, who had kind of put their hand up and volunteered to be early adopters and beta testers. And we have a lot of data coming in. For others who are interested and do want to be part of the beta program, I would highly recommend that please respond to Willow, provide information on the forms. There is a small little beta agreement that we're putting in place just to make sure that your efforts are sort of rewarded, and at the same time we have the appropriate agreement and checks in place to make sure that we do this with high fidelity and also don't jeopardize any intellectual property. So you'll see a small agreement coming your way. That's something that is in the works. It's being put together, and it'll be out very soon. Now, do remember that this first phase, I discussed this last webinar. It's a tiered approach. The first phase is beta on testnet, and then from there we'll progress, gradually one step at a time towards the mainnet. Also expanding and opening it up to larger masses. Right? What starts off as a small sort of a limited beta program would then emerge into a more larger general purpose GA availability or general availability, soon enough. So that's going to be the model for our testing and then subsequent launch. Development is going on at a furious pace. A lot of good work has happened over the last 2 weeks since we spoke. We're making very good progress on gluon plasma, which is one of the fundamental blocks that differentiates us as a decentralized, fast, rapid exchange as opposed to other decentralized exchanges. We're promising both a mix of speed and security. So getting that right is hard. Getting fraud proof right in all those different circumstances is non-trivial, and that's what is an area where we've got plasma, and specifically what we are calling internally as gluon plasma, helping us out. It's a very, very cool technology. It builds on top of plasma that many of you who are in the ETH community have heard of, and adding things that are more relevant to an account-based system like ours. Again, if you missed some of those, good, fantastic content on plasma, I highly recommend go back to the last edition of our webinar. The recordings are, available online, and Joe could also point you to that sometime, towards the end of this webinar, of where you can find all the recordings. They're all on YouTube, and you should go and listen to that. Bharat did a great job of explaining that and walking through all the details of what gluon plasma is, how it applies, how it compares to the other models, the standard plain vanilla plasma, the UTXM models, and so on and so forth. So I would highly recommend go look at that video, and I'm positive you'll enjoy it. Now, going on to the beta program itself, the testing, as I'd mentioned again last time, is going to be feature by feature and iterative. The approach that we are taking, which is, of course, the modern software development approach, is to not just wait for the entire product to be fully baked and then start testing, but test it as we ship. So, as we're building things and we're putting things together and we're getting ready, some of the big modules and big features, we want to start shipping those out, whether it's registration, whether it's order placement, whether it's order matching, whether it's settlement, or any other of the, bigger bunches. You will see them coming, sometimes together, sometimes one by one. And of course, they need to be, logical and holistic so that testers can actually have a meaningful test case around it. But we do want to ship them in bundles, and we do want to ship them iteratively. What that would do is that would allow both early feedback for us, so that if things need to change or we have certain bugs that is holding us back, we want to go attend to it right away. And at the same time, it'll also allow testers to get their hands on things sooner, and they'll be able to influence the product a lot more than waiting for something that is fully baked and fully ready and then trying to give feedback, where incorporating feedback becomes more and more difficult. So that's basically the model. That's what's going on. Lots of good update, lots of good development, and then of course the beta program is going to start very soon. We're getting closer and closer to the start time, and last but not the least, as I just mentioned, it'll happen in iterative fashion. It'll happen in a step-by-step fashion. If you're interested, respond to Velo's call for information, if you may, on the forms, and get started. Okay, I'm going to pause a bit if anybody has any questions about the beta program or the update, and then jump into the second topic, which is the money laundering related topic that I want to discuss. What it implies, how it plays in the crypto system, and what are we thinking of doing.
All right, so just maybe 30 seconds here for you guys to get your questions in, either using Telegram or YouTube chat, and then we'll carry on. Doesn't look like there's any questions at this stage, so do you like to go ahead?
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so as I had mentioned, the other important part that I wanted to talk about very briefly this morning, but something which has very high impact in the financial system at large, is the whole concept of money laundering and, of course, the anti-money laundering approach that banks and financial institutions take to mitigate that or to avoid it. Now, from our standpoint, we have a few characteristics. We are an exchange, so of course we're dealing with transactions where people may have motivations to launder money, and then we are also dealing with a decentralized exchange where we let people, in some sense, sort of own their own identity, own their own, um, sort of identity and authorization on the platform. So, how do we play in the whole scheme of money laundering? So I think what might be important for us to understand is how does it work today, right? Like what's going on in the mainstream financial system on Main Street. And the way things work today is there are essentially two broad things that most banks and financial institutions tend to do. Um, One is they try to sort of get into this, what is, of course, become a very common jargon, which is called KYC, which is know your customer. And the main idea behind that knowing your customer is to make sure that you can um, essentially expose or be aware of every single source from where money is being infused into the system. So, in other words, you disallow or you try to put guards around allowing any sort of masking. And if people can't hide behind something, then it's easier, of course, to track who it was. Who was the party that was involved, right? And then the second part of the puzzle usually involves a whole bunch of paper trailing or a lot of transaction tracking. Sometimes also in terms of transaction tracking, there are certain rule-based systems that exist in the banking world, and they've existed for over 20 years. I've seen them personally for that much and longer, even on Wall Street. And then they have been around in all sorts of financial systems where certain types of transactions alert the sort of guardrails to come on even more. Transactions above a certain amount, transactions that are more frequent, transactions that are of certain suspicious nature. So broadly speaking, I think those have been like the two big tools that most financial institutions have used to combat money laundering, right? Those are the big anti-money laundering vehicles for them. One is know your customer, so get them up front to kind of put down all their documentation, just sort of declare your, not publicly, but declare at least to the institution their source, and then track all the transactions, track everything thoroughly. Now, having said that, though, it's not necessarily super effective, and we want to figure out why it's not effective, what's going on that's not working, right? So the first thing that happens in such a scenario is it's super expensive, very ineffective. Think about the amount of paperwork that we all do year after year after year, transaction after transaction, financial institution after financial institution in terms of KYC. There is so much paperwork and so much documentation that goes into it that many a times, in fact, many of these financial institutions are burdened by simply with trying to deal with so much data or so much documentation that they're collecting. So, by nature of just collecting so much information that may not be directly useful, the whole process is very expensive. And, as I said, obviously not super effective. Now, over the years, from manual paperwork and manual documentation, people have moved to automated systems. People are now trying to, companies rather are now trying to use even tools like machine learning and pattern recognition to help them here. And things have improved. It's not like things haven't improved at all, but it still remains a big, challenging, daunting task to deal with all the ever-growing mounds of paperwork. And the second part of the puzzle really is that if you look at it from a financial institution standpoint, a lot of this is driven from a standpoint of compliance. A lot of this is driven from a standpoint of legal-ess, if you may, which by itself is not wrong, but it essentially deviates the focus more towards paperwork rather than solving the problem, right? So when you are trying to again go back to effectively sort of mitigating or stopping money laundering, there is more to just the paperwork. But the paperwork itself is so tedious that most financial institutions just get caught into that. Given that, in the last 15 years or more, pretty much after the dot-com bust and the advent of the mainstream internet after that, a lot of our transactions really are today on the internet. So if you think about it, most financial transactions directly are on the internet. Most people bank on, via their mobile phone or the web. Um, if you think about e-commerce, a lot of transactions happen, millions and billions of dollars of transactions over the internet. And then similarly, all other, virtual and physical goods that are being transacted. Now, if you look at KYC, especially whether you're looking at, opening accounts on the internet that enable one of these transactions, and then if you start expanding that to beyond domestic, beyond a particular sovereign country onto international boundaries, the whole KYC process gets very tricky, because now you're looking at scanned documents, and again a barrage of scanned documents being uploaded, being verified. If you really think about it, the fidelity or the honesty of those documents themselves is hard to establish. Sometimes they're relatively easier if they're signed and they have some sort of an authority that verifies it. But again, applying it broadly is difficult, and it's again very tedious, and it's very non-standardized, because you might end up getting that for one kind of document, but not for every kind, right? Because documents vary everything from local utility bill to passports to just about any other kind of document that the bank needs to establish identity. And then on top of it, because these banks become centralized warehouses of all this data, all this PII data or personal data, they also become susceptible to being big targets for essentially hackers who are interested in leveraging identity theft, those who end up trying to get hold of personal information that can be misused. This also leads to trouble around KYC, where maybe the documents could be forged, or maybe the documents could be based on a stolen identity. So there are all these challenges, right? These are real world challenges. These are painful. These involve a lot of money year on year. Billions of dollars get spent on this, and then they are relatively ineffective, because it's not like we have mitigated and thwarted all sorts of money laundering. Part of the puzzle, or part of the trouble there, is also because a lot of this money laundering goes through certain states where you might have colluding banks, or you might have colluding counterparties, and so tracking them or mitigating them is easier said than done. Now, going back to more our scenario of the exchange and the crypto world, I think before we get into what we are trying to do, and how we are trying to understand and mitigate this, and how it applies broadly to crypto, if you may, it may make sense to just look at the various stages or the various steps of money laundering, like what happens really. Now, some of you may be aware of this. Those who worked in financial institutions, or those who have interacted with such companies, probably have gone through some form of training which talks about all these stages of money laundering and how to mitigate them, and how to catch when something is going wrong. But for others, maybe you'll find this a nice systematic view of how money laundering really happens in the system, and how you as a citizen, or you as somebody who maybe they're working for an institution, or transacting with one, could quickly maybe try and find what's going on here that might be suspicious. So the first thing that really happens, the first stage, is obviously many of these sort of black money, if you may, or the money that is not earned through genuine means, or paid taxes on, or illegal, illicit money, is usually stored in cash. Now, the reason that people usually store this as in cash is because of a couple of different big reasons. One is, if you store it in cash, obviously placing it into the system or bringing it into the system becomes easier, because now you can take that cash, divide it into various parts, and essentially infuse the system with that cash-driven assets. If you had that sitting in a bank or a financial institution, the source is more easily traceable. The second also part of the puzzle is that there is a lot of the market capitalization of some of the largest of currencies, like if you look at the US dollar, or the euro, or the GBP, or even the Japanese yen, it's very high. So if you end up taking even a substantial amount, even millions of dollars of cash, and try to place that, essentially kind of move that through the system, it is not going to impact either the price, or it basically go unnoticed, right? So cash, both because traceability becomes difficult, plus noticing it in the larger scheme of things becomes hard, has been the vehicle for a lot of people who launder money. which is why a lot of financial institutions also put caps on the amount of cash that one can deposit on a daily basis, or the kind of things that you can bring into the system. Having said that, it still is very hard, right? I mean, there are companies that set up shell companies, and they'll have genuine looking businesses, like typical businesses would be things like restaurant businesses or travel agencies or so on and so forth, where they could claim that a lot of the transactions are happening in cash, and so these are really the proceeds of their transactions which they're trying to deposit. Now if you apply that to the crypto world, very sort of truthfully, I think there are a couple of problems up front. I mean, being sure, you could masquerade your identity in some sense in certain situations in crypto, but getting to know where it originated, where it was infused, is not hard at all. There's immense amounts of traceability. And then, although the crypto market cap has been increasing steadily over a period of time, and for those who are in the system, certainly expect to see that increase more and more. The reality is that if there is a massive movement, if people start taking millions of dollars worth of crypto and started moving that through the system, that would actually impact the crypto market cap. That you could start seeing significant impact even in the prices of certain cryptocurrencies, and so it becomes very noticeable. So we personally feel that I feel placement is probably going to remain more on a cash basis. Now, as far as companies that are dealing with people buying from fiat to crypto and managing that well, and there are people on that part of the spectrum who are sort of putting in KYC and other things in place and checks and balances, I think that'll be fine. That'll probably avoid sort of illicit placement of money. Now, the next step beyond placing money, of course, is, well, you got to kind of masquerade it. You're going to move it around in the system from one account to the other, from one region to the other, from one type of transaction to the other, with the objective, of course, obfuscating it, because the audit trail, as we just spoke about, is all about tracking transactions. And if they all get muddled up or they all go round and round, things get confusing. And that's where banks can't find things out very easily, or financial institutions can't find things out very easily. Now, this usually in the traditional financial system happens many a time, especially the big schemes happen in collusion with certain banks, because it is, this is where they would hold it or place it and move it between accounts, and then things get very tricky, and goes from one jurisdiction to the other, where traceability becomes impossible at certain points in time. The same stuff on crypto is actually very, very, very traceable. In fact, a common man could go and just look at all the transactions and track all the movement down, because it's all on the public blockchain. So the layering part also becomes trickier. Now, even in cases where people have tried to use cryptocurrency for illegitimate reasons, that's why things have been tracked, right? Where things get found out even further down, where things are moved, or what was the transaction trail. So it's really like obfuscation is really hard, is how we see it, which is good, because we want to make sure we don't allow money laundering. We want to make sure that we have systems and checks and balances in place which only allow genuine traders to genuinely use the financial system in an independent manner, right? In a manner that's fair. So I think this obfuscation, or the disallowance of obfuscation, almost by design, is a good thing. It's a good part of the whole crypto ecosystem. And then last but not the least, if people wanted to just keep their money in cash, well, there is no motivation to launder it, right? What they really want to do most of the time in these laundering situations is take the cash, convert it into legitimate money, move them into accounts, and then, of course, use them to spend to buy other things, right? Buy homes, or buy yachts, or buy vacations, or buy whatever they want to buy, right? Or expensive items for consumption. And so usually the third stage, or the final stage of any laundering activity, is moving it back, like the integration back into the system. This again becomes interesting if you think about it in a sort of a graph theoretic or a crypto model. So if you what I just spoke through right now of placement and layering and then integration, it can actually be depicted very nicely through this graph. And due credits to Bharat for actually putting this graph together. He's been thinking about it for a while. If you look at this graph, this nicely explains what's going on behind the scenes, right? So you've got all these, if you look at these orange bits here, all these are essentially accounts that could be funded with money that's coming from the green source or the gray source. and it could be all cash moving into these systems, for example, right? So that's where you're introducing things into the system. And then the blue nodes could be thought of as all these different accounts through which these transactions will be moved, the money will be moved. So that's all the obfuscation, that's all the layering that's going on, right? Like back and forth and up and down and everything else in between. And then last but not the least, it needs to actually go back to the source, because that's where the integration happens. That's when you can get, how after having laundered through, if you may, right, from the deriving from the English meaning, things washed clean, moved back into the source, and then you pretend that this was all genuinely earned money. And if you look at this, the graph theoretic view, and just superimpose the idea of crypto or the crypto and blockchain based network, it'll be easy to find out all these cycles in the graph, or easy to find out all these different pieces that 90% of the time go back to the source. And if you see those transactions, and this is something we would be able to do, and anybody can do, really, using basic analytics and basic walking through blockchain, you'd be able to see that perhaps there is some money laundering activity going on if things are being placed onto different sort of accounts, if you may, or different sources or different addresses. They're being obfuscated or layered all over the place, or at least they're being, people are pretending to obfuscate it, and then eventually being brought back into the system. So this is something, if one can catch at a more of a graph theoretic level, if you may, I think the whole possibility of laundering becomes massively mitigated. It becomes a little more automatic, and it becomes disincentivizes all those who want to actually play this activity. The various stages of placing things in, layering stuff around, and then integrating it back. So it becomes very hard. Now, if you sort of summarize that, summarize the whole idea of laundering and then the AML bits is, first things, as we mentioned, was around cash, right? So we said a lot of this money moves into cash because obviously the cash is the source where placement becomes easier. So if we start saying, well, we disallow non-cash deposits, I think we sort of mitigate things right at the gate. We manage things right at the gate. We don't allow placement. And that basically, I would say, makes placement incredibly hard. It's like super hard, very hard. And in our system, in Leverj, we are going to be dealing with cryptocurrencies exclusively. We are not allowing people to put in fiat and transact that onto crypto. It's really crypto to crypto. So we don't allow for any kind of, firstly, fiat, and definitely non cash-based deposits. So that part of the picture is totally out. We just totally disallow it. The second part is that the crypto market cap is growing. That's a reality, and that's again, like I said, good and positive for people on the crypto ecosystem, and they certainly expect it to grow more. So things might become a little bit more under the radar as the market cap increases, as people try to move chunks of crypto and try to place it and do some layering. It's possible that some of them might start going more under the radar. What we want to do as a exchange, as somebody who will facilitate this transactions between cryptocurrencies over a period of time, and especially in the global scenario, because we're really a global company. We don't operate in many regions like the United States or a few other regions, but globally we are thinking of operating. And in a global type of scenario, I think what we do want to do is we want to certainly keep an eye on it. We want to see where the transactions are coming from, where they're going. Now, what we have done as a part of our system, and some of you who have attended our previous webinars around zero knowledge API keys and how our accounts are set up and what are the different ways to kind of set up on our system, hopefully you've had a chance to just get through all of that great content. If not, again, highly encourage, go back, look at the previous webinars. We have mentioned that we will have a concept, essentially, in very simple terms, where the withdrawal of that cryptocurrency is allowed to the same account which accepts the deposit, right? So essentially, we have the same account from where we get deposits into our system, and the same accounts to which you can take money back, right? Now, this itself, by design, is disallowing a lot of this layering or moving money back and forth. Or in this case, it's not money, but the cryptocurrency back and forth. What we're saying is, you establish your identity, you have that account associated with us on a contract, right? So it's not really us, so to speak, but publicly through our contracts. And then you deposit crypto using that, and then when you make your withdrawals, it goes back to the same account, right? So if you really think about that simple model, yeah, it's disrupting layering a fair bit. It's all traceable. It's all out there on the public blockchain. It's all out there, in fact, in the Ethereum public blockchain, because that's what we are leveraging on the smart contracts. And anybody and everybody can audit it. Everybody can go look at it and see, and figure out if where the money is coming from, where the money is going, which essentially is the same account. Okay, so that kind of summarizes some of this discussion. Again, I want to reiterate before I close the loop here is that we do want to make sure that we put our checks and balances in place. We do not want to do it via a lot of paperwork-driven bureaucratic process, but we want to leverage some of the inherent benefits of the sort of crypto makeup, if you may, or the crypto building blocks. And we do want to use smart strategies like making sure withdrawal is to the same account from where you deposit, and some other very clear, very simple, very intuitive things to put the checks and balances in place. So with that said, I think I'm kind of covered here. We obviously went through some of the product updates, also spoke about the beta program, and then moved on to discussing a bit about AML and our at least initial thoughts on it. I won't say these are the final thoughts, but some initial interesting thoughts. I'm going to hand it over to Joe and see if there are any questions, anything that I could answer today for anyone who's on this live webinar.
Thanks, Shashank. Lots of interesting stuff there. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes for questions. Sorry, this one was a little bit shorter than usual. If you missed at the start, some of the team are away at Consensus, so we don't really have a full team here. But yeah, I think Shashank did a good job of going through some things that we had to share, and hopefully the next webinar will have more. But yeah, go ahead and ask any questions in the YouTube chat or the Telegram chat. I'll give you guys 1 or 2 minutes before we end the stream. Thanks, guys. Okay, it would appear that there aren't any questions today. Once again, thank you for participating, and thank you, Shashank, for taking the time out of your morning to present this to us.
Well, yeah, pleasure. And thanks again for whoever was able to join. Enjoy the week ahead. And in 2 weeks, as Joe mentioned, we'll have a lot of other interesting updates, especially about product and what you can get your hands on. So thanks again.
All right. Thank you very much, guys. See you in 2 weeks.